Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. After the cancellation of last year's Edinburgh Festivals due to the coronavirus pandemic, apart from a small number of online shows, this year's festivals are going ahead, with some shows happening in front of live audiences, but with a large online component, something that is likely to continue into the future. With continuing restrictions on travel, particularly internationally, and limits on audience numbers in venues, the host city of the world's largest arts festival is likely to be a lot quieter this August than what we were used to seeing pre-pandemic. As I haven't made it there myself this year, I spoke to someone who has travelled north of the border for his 27th season on the Fringe, as performer, writer, director, producer, or some combination of these, Guy Masterson. He was just about to perform the last show in a limited run of a cut-down version of his highly acclaimed one-man Undermilk Wood by Dylan Thomas, when I asked him how different Edinburgh seems this year.
It is very different. In the little pockets of venues, there is a similar feel once you're in there. For example, once you're in the Assembly Gardens, there is that kind of knowing feel that you're in the Assembly Gardens. However, they've only got one venue there, the one Spiegel tent, which is doing a program of work from 12 o'clock through till midnight. And I was really lucky to be invited to do 7 performances there. They had an empty slot and they called me and said, would you like to come and fill them? So, I thought, absolutely. If I can go up without a risk, then I will do it. None of us had any idea that there was going to be an audience, but they very cleverly made the gardens full of tables, and they had all the COVID rules and table service and all of that. So the gardens quickly became a hub for people who wanted to get out of the normal haunts and get an outdoor drinking and catch a show if they wanted to. Mainly it's a big bar, as it always is anyway. But so I was glad to be part of that. Glad that it was my 27th season, consecutive if you exclude last year. So for me, maintaining my record, if you like, was good. There were no posters when I got off the train. That was the first thing I noticed. All the railings around the station they were clear. Yeah. There were only suddenly after about the first week, you started seeing the ones on lampposts, the wraparounds. And then a few started popping up. There are obviously a few people with more money than sense, and they spent money on that stuff. But I did no publicity apart from online social media and stuff like that. Mm. And I wasn't expecting to be reviewed, and yet I was reviewed 5 times for 7 performances. So that's unheard of. Yeah. And even more unheard of was that I got reviewed by the same group twice on the same day by 2 different people, which was amazing. So yes, there were a lot of differences to normal stuff. In terms of big names on the Fringe, I don't really notice any big name. I mean, you've got some of the comedians, the Whose Line Is It Anyway group are back, but they're always here, which is great. Some of the comedians who were in 12 Angry Men, Stephen Frost, Andy Smart, Ian Coppinger. I booked David Calvito into the Roxy, which was great. So he's up doing the event, which he hasn't done since 2009, and he's had a great response. So it's greatly reduced. I think there's only a handful of theatre pieces up here. And Pip Hutton, of course, came up. So he did the same thing. He did. I think he was slated to do 6 performances, ended up doing double that because his audience just came out for him, which was great. Yeah. And my audience have come out for me from Milkwood, which is lovely. So yeah,
it's a year for. It's not really a year for taking risks with large casts, brand new shows that take a lot of rehearsal. I mean, shows like your Milkwood and Pip shows, you can just sort of do them, really, can't you, without much rehearsal?
Literally out of the bag.
Yeah.
Out of the bag and onto the stage. I mean, I did have to do the reduced version, which is the semi-skimmed version, to fit into an hour slot. And that's always difficult for me to sort of just forget what I've been doing for 24 years and remember the cuts. That's the hardest thing. Yeah. But interestingly, I'm in production at the moment for the West End. The Shark is Broken, which is transferred. We were going to go up last May during lockdown. And Shark is Broken was the big hit of the Fringe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
The Jaws piece. And it got picked up by Sonia Friedman. There was a great bun fight over the play, which was fantastic. And eventually we selected Sonia Friedman, which we're very, very happy about. And she's kept it foremost of her post-COVID program. And she said to me the other day, this is the only piece of new writing going into the West End for the foreseeable future. Everything else is, the musicals coming back, the plays, which everybody knows, safe stuff, yeah. Mind you, you could say that Shark is Broken is pretty safe because it's about Jaws and, it's got a good track record. But it is technically new writing for the West End. So the risk set, you've got to, and it's not just the risk of that you're taking as a producer. It's the risk for the general aging population that have theatre as part of their cultural diet. They don't necessarily want to be in a darkened space where the air isn't circulating, and they know there's this evil, invisible bug floating around. So even with the double vaccination, there's a few people who can't take the risk. Yeah. When you go over 60, as I just did.
Oh dear. Yeah, the theatre that I have been to a few productions over the past few weeks since everything's opened up again. And the audiences seem enthusiastic. They seem very keen. I mean, I went to one, since we were allowed to sit next to each other, I went to one that was literally packed, shoulder to shoulder, at Hope Mill Theatre. How have audiences been in Edinburgh? Because the regulations changed in the middle of the run as well, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And that was interesting because initially all the seats were, sort of set into groups of 2, 4, 2, 3, 4s and separated.
Yeah.
So you were encouraged when you came in, if you were in a pair, to sit as a pair or to sit in a group of 3, find little groups. So because it's free seating, of course.
Yeah.
In other theatres, they'll book you in your groups and then they'll separate the groups for that performance. There's a lot of administration involved. So basically what they did was they had the auditorium and little groups, mainly 2s and sometimes 3s and sometimes 4s. And if you were in a group of 3, that's what you'd do. Yeah. You'd find 3 seats next to each other. And then on the first Monday, the 7th day of the Fringe, I think it was, they reduced the restrictions. So suddenly you could go up to a bar and order a drink, which made ordering drinks much easier. And you didn't have to sit 2 meters away from people. So they altered the configuration, increased the capacity slightly. And once the capacity is increased, technically the risk goes down, assuming that you're going to fill all the seats.
Yeah.
So, there's always that. I think that the whole idea of double vaccination for entry is very weird. I don't agree with discrimination for people who necessarily don't want to have the vaccine or can't have the vaccine. So there should be an alternative method of allowing them in, for example, getting tested and proving that you've been tested. And as long as we don't turn into a sort of an apartheid situation that only double vax people can go to the theatre, and don't make it an us and them situation for the audience either. Yeah. So the audience are looking at people and going, "Are you double vaxxed?"
Yeah,
I think we'll get through this. We don't want to politicize.
Yeah.
I don't think we should politicize the.
Well, that's already been done, really, in here and America, and more in America.
Yeah, and we do need to resist as much as we can. We don't want to give away our freedoms, but too much. Obviously, we've got to be aware of it. But there needs to be an understanding that there are people who can't have the vaccine.
Yeah.
And, we can't. So.
What's it been like wandering about in Edinburgh? Because I can't imagine festival time when you can walk down the Royal Mile without being accosted by people with leaflets, and you can't just walk into a shop or a restaurant or Botanic Gardens. Yeah, it just seems strange.
You're not being assailed by leafleters, which is good. They've got some buskers out there, and the crowds are forming.
Yeah,
and I would say that most of the adults over 50 are wearing masks when they're walking down the streets. I would say most of anybody below the age of 30 aren't. It's that kind of feeling of being indestructible. And that's reflected on the trains as well.
Yeah.
And there's still an awareness that there's something out there and we need to be careful of it. Yeah. And that's right, I think. I still don't understand how bus companies can just run buses through Edinburgh and just all day, and there's no disinfectant in there or anything like that. It's purely down to personal. But anyway.
As a touring theatre company, your company, obviously you've been affected over the past 18 months or so. So, I mean, what generally has it been like? I mean, obviously you've not been able to do anything at all, and international touring because of COVID and Brexit are going to be effective for a long time, I think, aren't they?
For me, financially, it's been a disaster. I lost about 65, 70 booked gigs, and I lost 2 very lucrative tours in America. So it cost me hugely. And so me personally, I just busied myself with creative jobs that I'd wanted to do for a long time, finishing scripts and written screenplays. I've written a book. I've launched another business, but nothing that actually pays the bills.
Yeah.
So I've had to rely on whatever government help I was entitled to. It's been very, very tough, and I'm in debt, but I'm still here. I was able to do 10 performances of A Christmas Carol in that little window just before Christmas, just before the second lockdown. And that actually saved me. I think if I hadn't done those performances, which were well attended, I would be probably bankrupt by now, or even more in debt than I am. But, everybody's in the same boat. There are people far worse off than me. And because I was entitled to the government grant, I was able to get through it to a degree. I know lots of artists who just weren't entitled to anything from the government. So they literally had to leave the business and try to find other jobs in supermarkets and delivery drivers and things like that. Needs must, but it's a great smash on the head for the industry. And it also seems that we are one of the last to go back, because these restrictions affect anything in a closed space, and the kind of audiences that theatre gets are of older people. So we are that need protecting. So it's been hit very, very hard. The West End in particular has been. I don't know how some of those people have survived, and particularly the owners of those theatres that haven't had anything in there for 18 months. Yeah. How can they continue to pay their rent in London without any income whatsoever and no help from the government? Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, Sonia Friedman in particular has been quite outspoken about that, hasn't she, right through?
She has. She's a very successful producer, and I know that it's because she was successful that she had some reserves. Yeah. But they hemorrhaged millions and millions and millions of pounds.
Even Lloyd Webber's remortgaged his house, I believe, as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. So it's rough, and it does feel to a degree, and all artists say this, theatre, they don't know what they're going to lose. Don't they realise what we give back, and the tax that comes from ticket sales, and they need to recognise the impact of the arts on the economy. And same thing with Edinburgh, they had to fight for a COVID-related relief fund in order to make the venues that they wanted to open up COVID safe. They couldn't afford to pay for those alterations that they needed to make, and the technical advances, and they couldn't. Where was that money coming from? Yeah. So there was a little bit of help there for the venues that did eventually open up, but it only covered what they had to do in order to make things COVID safe.
Yeah, and you must be able to see in Edinburgh that there aren't any foreign companies. I mean, normally there are companies from all over the world in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And you, as a company that tours all over the world, you must be seeing, that must reflect on you thinking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. It hasn't struck me that there are no foreign companies, but there are no foreign companies, and all the performers that I see are British. Or have been British, a couple of Americans. Dave Calvida's a resident over here. Yeah, true. That'll please some of the Brexiteers.
Yes, but Brexit as well is starting to kick in for touring. I know the singer Fish has been talking a lot about this, from used to be Marillion, how, if you tour in small venues, particularly, it's not worth you can't make back the cost of visas for all of your crew just from selling tickets. So some things are just not feasible, and he can't sell records abroad unless he has a plant over in Europe because of all the taxes and everything. So that must be going to affect you as well, isn't it? All of those sorts of things.
Yes, I didn't lose any European touring of gigs that I booked, so I haven't encountered the additional costs of visas and stuff like that, but I'm sure I will. But yes, that is a factor. I mean, I'm a dual national with America, and I do have access to an Italian passport, which I'm going to apply for, which might make things a little easier. But yes, I mean, if we have to get visas and they cost money, and then we have to pay, foreign taxes at 25% or whatever. This is going to, if we try to pass those costs on to the hosting venues, it's not going to be viable for them. So there is, it's going to wipe out a lot of the foreign touring, particularly for bands. But I've got a few friends who are literally traveling classical comedians, and they are constantly going between orchestras in Europe. Who, if they're down a euphonium player, for example, or they need a violinist, and they literally could fly to Stuttgart or fly to Berlin and fill in for a concert. And that's all out the window now. And this is how they made their living. They flit from city to city playing concerts in an orchestra with no need for a work permit. It's gone. And there's no work for them here because all the orchestras we've got here are fully populated.
Yes.
And these are highly trained, highly skilled musicians. I can imagine that this is going to be very difficult. Thank you, Brexit.
Yes. The gift that just keeps on giving, isn't it?
Yeah. That wasn't mentioned on the Boris bus, was it?
No, it wasn't, was it? But you've got a few exciting things lined up. You've got the end of your Edinburgh run is it tonight, your last one?
Yeah, in 2 hours, in fact. This has been my vocal warm-up.
Right. You've got a West End show production as well. So
COVID permitting, yeah. And then I've got a tour of Christmas Carol at Christmas, which is good. And then I haven't really thought much about next year. That's another knock-on effect, is that all the venues that I normally tour to are just literally rebooking everything that they had booked for last year.
Yeah.
So there's very little in the pipeline for me. But I'm looking to pare down my touring work and do more executive coaching and one-on-one mentorship stuff in the arts and writing. In the Marillion Conspiracy, which I've now honed into a full-length 2-act play, and I'm looking to hock that. And I've got a screenplay which is in development about my uncle, which I've been ruminating on for far too long, and finally found a through line for, and I'm very excited about it. And I sent it to my cousin Kate, which is Richard Burton's daughter, who is the arbiter of all things Burton, and she loved it. So with her backing it, I'm very excited about the possibilities.
So still very positive for the future.
A big star by Richard Burton. Yes, I mean, you've got to keep positive, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got to keep the wheels turning.
Yeah.
It's like being a white van man, got to go from job to job, man. Keep that van going. Got to keep the petrol going in there.
That was Guy Masterson, whose run of Under Milkwood Semi-Skimmed at the Edinburgh Fringe has now ended, but the full versions of this and some of his other shows tour regularly around the UK and internationally. The Shark is Broken will run at the Ambassadors Theatre in London from the 9th of October 2021 to the 15th of January 2022, COVID permitting. For more information about any of Guy's shows, see www.theatretoursinternational.com. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.